stuff you've ever done in your career disappears.
That's I was going to say, we already think that of Trent anyway.
I've been thought an idiot my whole life. It's fine.
DorkCast 47 is all about content, and for that we brought in our first international guest, the Godfather of Content, Andy Robbins. Nerd alert on this one, we talk about APIs and C++ classes. We also discuss the differences between RFAs and ITMs and why some of you might want to consider getting on the ITM train. There's also some talk about why partners would want to work with specialty trades that are strong with their content. Sit back and enjoy this Dorkfest.
And we're live. Episode 47. Are you content with your content? Yeah, you see what I did there with guest Andy Robbins. Andy, thank you for coming on today. I feel like this is going to be a pretty lively discussion.
I do too, because Darren
Young's here. So.
Damn it.
And
David Ronson.
Yeah. Everything goes downhill once Darren joins in. Now, Darren, welcome, buddy. And I'm actually going to dip out here. So with that, I'm actually going for a bubbly because yours truly has to get his butt back to work today. So enjoy this content and don't be content, and all y'all have a little fun with it.
English is fun.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
Well, all right. You want me to kick off?
I was going to say, Jonathan, you're the one that pitched this episode. So why don't you go ahead and take over the hosting duties for this part?
Right on, man. Right on. And I also wanted to introduce my drink because it's a special drink. Well, I'm not sure if we can see that. Anyways, this is Yellow Dot, which is, or Yellow Spot. Sorry, Irish whiskey. It's freaking beautiful. It's from the guys at Ghost Creative. Thank you so much for the Yellow Spot. You can see I'm doing a good job on it because like it's almost there. And that's not just what I drank before the show. That's everything else too. But I'm super looking forward to the show. I think this is actually one of the discussions that happens again and again and again. Mm-hmm. We go to how do you understand content, and then we're talking to people from Revit that's never even heard of what ITMs are. So I think it will be fun to talk about. What are you drinking today, Travis? Or are you drinking today?
I am drinking. So I told you guys earlier in Slack, I was kicking around what I wanted to do. This bottle caught my eye, Blade and Bow. It's Kentucky bourbon. It comes with a cool little key, kind of in the fashion of Blanton's. You're supposed to collect those. But once I wrap this up, I'm sure we'll talk about it a good bit. We spent some time together in Boston, and I had to go out and buy some of this in honor of Andy. So once I finish my Glencairn glass here of my bourbon, I'm going to go ahead and sip on some Guinness. So what about you, Trent?
Well, I'm pretty boring today. I'm just got me a Dr. Pepper, actually. So tis the season.
Wouldn't you like to be a pepper too?
Right. Yeah. I've been working a lot on the car right now and doing trying to get the engine tuned in. So I'm doing a lot of third gear pulls and data logging, and that's not really good to go out and do on back roads late at night at 100 mile an hour when you've been drinking in a podcast. So yeah.
That sounds like a bad idea.
Yeah. So we're keeping.
Come on, Ricky Bobby.
Yeah. Right. Oh, Andy, what about you?
Well, I mean, seeing as it's 11 o'clock in the evening here, I've already been to the pub and drank some Tetley's bitter there, four pints of Tetley's. So now I'm having a couple of glasses of Mini Vino, which is a Merlot, an Italian Merlot. I picked up 12 cases of these from the local supermarket. They were on offer. They were reduced from about $35 to $10 a case. So I got 12 cases of those.
Yeah, right on. My wife started drinking all these like little champagnes. Every time I go out there, she's got like a little champagne. And I'm like, I haven't had champagne since I was like on a plane in first class, because it'll give you the champagne in the little rubber or plastic cup or whatever, which I always thought was hilarious. So So to kick it off, Andy, could you, for the people that don't know you, which are not the people that are directly watching in the audience, but could you give us a little background on who you are, or what you did, and kind of why, you know, how you got to the point
where we're
of, yeah, absolutely, man.
I can. I had to think back a bit, but yeah, I started in 1990 with MAP, micro application packages. You guys probably know it as MAP, and came straight out of software school and started working for the company. I had no idea about CAD or sheet metal or piping or anything like that. So I had to quickly learn AutoCAD. We were trying to develop something on the AutoCAD platform. And that was back in the day when it was AutoCAD 9, AutoCAD 10. So the first thing that I started working with was a list-based 2D sheet metal program, because historically, MAP, we did a sheet metal program called CamDuct, which did the flat sheet developments of ductwork. Nothing to do with pipe work or electrical containment or anything like that. So there was a need for detailers to produce the drawings, and they were all, you know, there was these old guys sat at drawing desks with pencils and rulers and scale rules and drawing everything out, and CAD was coming along. So we developed a 2D program that actually linked directly to the CamDuct product that we had in those days. And that was done, I mean, it was still DOS back in the day. And that was done using a program called VM386. And it allowed you to task switch between AutoCAD and CamDuct. And you could type in your dimensions in CamDuct for the fitting that you wanted to manufacture or draw, detail, press a button, switch back to AutoCAD, and the 2D would be there. It was quite magical at the time. That was, you know, 90s, early 90s, 92, 93, around that time. Around AutoCAD 11, we started developing 3D products. So we took the 2D sheet metal products and we converted them into 3D in using AutoLisp. So my first real programming language was AutoLisp. We developed 3D patterns that allowed you to draw the 3D ductwork in AutoCAD 11. And again, there was a direct link to CamDuct through some import file. It was probably late 90s. Late 90s, we switched to starting to work with object-oriented C++. And a new programmer started with us at the time, and he was he'd had quite a few years experience in C++, and that kind of drove where we're at. Middle to late 90s, with AutoCAD 14 came Object-ARX. And by that time, the item content had been developed in C++. So it was quite a short journey to get from the item contents that we were using in CamDuct and make those parametric and drawable graphically in AutoCAD using Object-ARX. And one of the big drivers for that, and by the way, this was all sheet metal at the time, so it was only for ductwork.
Yeah.
One of the big drivers was around T5, Terminal 5, Heathrow Terminal 5, which opened in 2008. Well, it was being detailed 7 to 8 years before that. So around 2000, we actually went down and presented to them of what we could do with the sheet metal, and they really liked it in AutoCAD. This was item content again, and it was a choice between us and a couple of competitors around at the time for detail in AutoCAD environments, but they really wanted pipe work and electrical containment. So we went away and we developed some new patterns in C++, item-based, and we showed them again 2 or 3 months later, and they took that on board. So Terminal 5 was all detailed with CAD. It was called CAD Duct in the day in the UK, but we introduced pipe work around that time in electrical containment, and then it really took off from there.
So can I ask you a question, man? So in 2008, they were actually doing some level of 3D
Oh,
coordination.
they'd finished the 3D coordination of Terminal
really?
5 in 2008.
Oh,
Wow.
in AutoCAD, that'd be 2000, right? AutoCAD 2000.
Probably 2005, 6, something like that.
Okay, 2005 or 6.
Yeah.
We had some big breaks between when we adopted 2000 and the next one,
Right,
because
yeah.
we were one of those
Every
companies that
release,
skipped
you
3
miss-
years between everything.
You miss every odd number release because there tends to be little bugs in them.
Yeah, we wait until everybody else gets the bugs out, and then we'll look at trying it. So when that released and in 2008, when does TSI come into it? Because we, like, you said we would think of you as map products, but man, whenever I think of this, I think of TSI, and
Right,
I had a project manager standing over me going, "Hey, there's this new program, check it out." Because I was actually working in Revit when I was introduced to TSI, so I was working like really early Revit.
Right.
But
I guess TSI was around that time, around T5 time. Heathrow Terminal 5 is one of the big things that sticks in my memory. The effort and work we had to put in to get that contract. But it was around then. TSI, well, we had a single distributor in the United States called Advanced Cutting Systems, based in Alabama, and they built and provided cutting machines for the sheet metal industry. So they were the sole resellers of the software, but they couldn't sell a CAD product because they were sheet metal people, machinery people. So we had, they contacted us, we didn't contact them. They came over to see us. I can't remember the exact year. I should do, but I can't. But yeah, we gave them the rights to sell map software in the States. We had a deal with Advanced Cutting Systems, so Camduct went through TSI to Advanced Cutting Systems, and it was the time as well, because it was it was a market where there weren't many players in it because of I don't know if you remember the pattern that used to be on sheet metal. What was it called now? Can't remember his name. Tricky Dicky, we used to call him. But there was a patent on sheet metal, and every Camduct or CAD-MEP sale, there was a $10,000 royalty on it that went to this guy, Dick Levine. That was it. That's who it was, Dick Levine. So there was a period of time in the States where the software was very, very expensive, but that wasn't our doing. That was because of this lawsuit and patent that was out there. And there wasn't much competition.
Is that why they split off the piping product? Because you could probably sell it as just the piping, and not have to pay that. Yeah, that makes sense now.
Exactly.
Right.
It was only on sheet metal detail. Yeah.
So
right on.
I do have not to your depth, but I do have about 15 years of software development. So when I got into starting to do some work within the database and stuff, in trying to work with databases, work with content and stuff. Maybe you could elaborate more so people understand, like, when you started to make the product for pipe, I mean, that must have been extremely difficult. And then to continue on 20-ish years as the product keeps being reused and reused and reused in other softwares that no, in my mind, no software developer really plans on his product being used for 20 years. Could you kind of go into that and how it kind of keeps evolving from there?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure about that. I mean, if you think about Windows, if you look at the kernel 32 in Windows, there's probably code in there that's 35 years old.
It's true.
So yeah,
that's a good point.
If it's architected right from the beginning, which when we undertook the C++ rewrite, I would say it was architected pretty well, using all classes for all the IO and things like that. The benefit of the classes is you can build on them, and you've always got forward and backward compatibility. So as soon as it became architected around C++, it's just never looked back, and you've never really had to go back and rewrite it, because you can always add to it and you don't lose any of the previous functionality. You can add new functionality without losing any of the previous. I think one of the things that was a good decision at the time was, which some people would disagree with, but was not to make it a database type program, like using SQL or something like that.
Yeah.
Because the way that the files stream, it's a binary format, so it's very efficient, very fast, and it stops people from messing with it. In SQL, you can go in and start changing things and screw things up. If it's binary proprietary format, you can't do that unless you provide APIs to allow people to do that, which we never really had any APIs for the fabrication products until they were acquired by Autodesk. I mean, there was a scripting language, and there still is a scripting language interface to it. But really, there was never a .NET or C# API to that. I don't know if that helps answer the question. But
it does. I'm always curious when a product starts out intended for one thing, right?
Right.
And then you
you
start bolting things on and kind of changing the way that it works.
Yeah, well, you're right. It was intended for sheet metal. So there's a lot of code in there to do with nesting algorithms and reporting of connectors and seams and things like that that you don't need for pipework or electrical containment. But the structure or the foundation of the pattern class is the same, whether it's duct, pipe, electrical, whatever it is. So it doesn't matter internally to the code, whether it's a piece of ductwork, a piece of pipework, or a piece of electrical containment. The main driving code doesn't care. It's just creating the geometry by calling the pattern class. So basically, you just build new patterns, C++ classes of patterns that fit into the framework, and then you can use it for whatever you want. I mean, there are even patterns, believe it or not, for things like urinals and sinks and things like that. They're just not exposed to the Revit environment. So my ex-boss, Peter, he had the vision that it could be a complete CAD platform or BIM platform replacement for something like Revit, because you can draw absolutely anything you want with it.
Wow.
As long as there's a pattern there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'd like to pivot on to what Darren put in the chat. I think it's pretty interesting. And I always love questions like that. The ones that are, because we always talk about how good something is or the successes of things, but I always find it interesting especially when you have someone like Andy here who was behind something, who basically created. I mean, there has to have been things there has to have been things along the way that didn't work out very well for you. So I love the question of, if you had the chance to do it all over again, what would you change?
Yeah. Well, I can't take all of the credit for what was created. It was a massive team effort. Well, I'm saying a massive team. There was only like 7 or 8 of us. Basically, I was the conductor of the orchestra. But if there was things that I would do over, I think the biggest thing I would redo would be the connectivity rules, how things connect together. It's way too complicated.
We get an amen for that.
Yeah. like 90 people down there going, yes.
It is. I mean, it totally works, but it's too complicated. You end up with a database with 500 pipework connectors. Holy shit, there's only 15 that you really need. So that's one thing. The other thing that we probably could have done better was the design line stuff. All right, yeah, it worked. Again, it was complicated to set up, and that complexity came because from the initial design of it, which was just drawing a load of straights. When I say straight, that could be duct, pipe, or electrical. It's agnostic to the design line. It doesn't matter what discipline it is. You know, straights, elbows, transitions and things like that coming off it. But then people wanted more and more and more things, automating things like dielectric unions and things like that for the pipework systems. That added another level of complexity to design line, which could have been done a better way. And in fact, in fairness to what they're doing with the Revit stuff now, is being done in a different way.
Is it?
The Revit routing options and things like that do not use design line. The only thing that uses design line technology in Revit is the design to fabrication bit. And that'll be phased out and better stuff will come out. So all this button coding, things like that, yeah, too complicated.
Yeah, I'm messing around with an easier, with attempting to make that design line easier too. I think though, the funny thing is like, and me, well, all three of us, me, Andy, and Voss were out in Boston, and they said, "Who's using design line?" And Dave Pikey's hand went immediately up. And had I been in the audience, my hand would have gone up too. Because once you learned it, and once you standardized around it, you could burn everybody else down with that stuff. I mean, you could go so fast, especially on the estimating side. Like once you had it lined up, it was fantastic. It just was very complex to line up. So you needed somebody to do that for you.
Yeah. I think the only other thing I regret that we didn't do earlier was introduce a fully fledged .NET API into the fabrication products. Right? It was built around some scripting, inbuilt scripting language, which meant you couldn't take, you know, any programmer and say, okay, go and read that manual and code this for me. I mean, there were financial decisions around that, because as soon as you open it up, you're not going to sell as much software because people are going to build things on it and stuff like that. But again, that's not such a bad thing. Look at AutoCAD. If it wasn't for the APIs, where would it be?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and you did open up a fair amount. I mean, I think that we were talking before the call, like, I don't know if you really foresaw this, but there are companies like mine that are been building tons of content within it. Now, I understand you're not opening up to the depths of the coding and do stuff, but you know, we still see it as, you know, as part of, you know, right or wrong, as part of one of our competitive advantages, that we've built out so much content, fabricationable content. And now with the move to Revit, we've been able to leverage a great deal of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. The content side, the content's always been open-ended. So, and the database has, every single table in the database, I call it a database, but it's not really a, you know, sequential database, but it is open-ended. It's unlimited to the amount of data you can put in there, the way it's architected. The same with the content. You can copy an item and paste it, rename it, change its CID, which is, you know, the customer identification number, not the internal pattern number, which a lot of people get confused by. And you've got a new piece of content, rename it, change the parameters, you've got a different piece of content. It's constrained to what that pattern class can draw, and the parameters that you can, you know, you can't add dimensions to it, but you know, there are about 600 or 700 different pattern classes, so there's enough variations of geometry in there.
I didn't realize there was that many. There is.
Well, and you probably didn't really foresee when you're building this piece of content that's meant for ductwork. 20 years later, an entire industry is still using that as its kernel of content in brand new you know, software packages. Maybe I would be interested to hear about what you kind of thought about the way that Revit started to expose and leverage everything there.
I mean, after the acquisition, it wasn't clear to us that the intention was to move the authoring stuff into Revit. That wasn't made absolutely clear. So it was a surprise And it was nice to be able to see that content and that technology being displayed in Revit and utilized. And really, the guys who did that, one of our top programmers, it didn't really take that much effort because it was all C++ and Revit was C++. It kind of just fit in. Like, okay, it was a new type of geometry object in Revit, a mesh type object, but it was certainly a lot more lightweight, and it was faster to develop than probably the original family editor.
Yeah,
that's a whole nother
Darren's
topic.
point.
Yeah, I think that's a big fallacy, and I think that's where a lot of the RFA, like the people who come to the RFA defense, I guess the word, Darren, like we were talking, the word native flies around, right? It's like, but what's really native to Revit? I mean, it's not like any of it was native to Revit.
Right. I mean, it's native C++ code running inside of Revit, and that content, the item content, is driven by what is now native Revit code. So it's native,
right? And
it could be classed as native.
And the info existing, and like the fabrication info kind of existing through like the database lookup tables and stuff like that. Actually, we're getting. I know we have. We're getting into some building models now that are massive. I mean, we're going into crazy detail, and to accomplish what ITMs do, with the quote unquote native Revit RFAs requires just an insane amount of shared parameters within the model. And I mean, I think we're seeing it. Seeing it crash models. I mean, it's
for sure
the program can't even handle it. So whether the initial intent you had was to build that, the database side of all that, and maybe it was an accidental stumble at that point, but I think that's kind of the beauty of it right now, is it's allowing us to place more of those parts within the models. So whether it was purposeful at the time, 20 years later, it seems to have been quite a benefit.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it was basically stumbled into the Revit environment, but it works. It works. Go ahead.
Ken had a weird question, and I'd like to ask it, and you can answer as much as you want. But I think the reason a lot of people didn't think it was native was because a lot of the pattern files weren't picked up.
That's a good point.
Moving forward.
Right.
And I know for me that was tough because I lost specific like product listed.
Steel was a big one.
Steel
right?
was a big one.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that's just because I hate drawing steel in Revit. But
well, we had steel ITMs. We wanted them, right? I mean,
we wanted the steel. I had all I had the sinks and the faucets and everything, man. I had it all there, and I had thousands of wrapped objects on top of it, which you can now get, I guess. I didn't even know that, Andy. You were the one when you were saying, hey, you just go in there and you save it as, and now it will suddenly show up in Revit and be okay on some of those wrapped items. But what do you think the thought pattern, what was the thought on that? And what's your thought on that idea that they sort of decided some of these we're not going to go ITM on?
Yeah. I mean, the thought process around that it's not a technological issue, because every single item that is available in Academy PS, MEP or Camduct can display in Revit, be detailed in Revit. It was more a product manager decision that why do we want to allow conflicting objects in Revit like the steel? Revit's got steel, so why should we have another type of steel in Revit? Never mind the fact that the steel is much more lightweight and a lot easier to detail with. That wasn't a consideration. Things like the diffusers and some of the equipment, why do we want to put those in Revit when Revit already has those, and those support design parameters? Well, okay, fair enough, I understand that. But in the subcontractor world, who gives a monkeys about the design parameters? It's already being sized. You already know the sizes that you need to detail it to. So let me use the piece of kit that I want to.
until the next change. Yeah.
Well, we resize everything anyways.
Yeah.
I mean, how many people in the companies that we deal with, how many of them use the sizing tools in Revit?
Yeah.
Look, I'm not trying to take on more scope I'm not getting paid for, so I'm not gonna. Yeah, exactly.
I want to ask about that, man. So it was almost a teaser to look in to CAD map, and this was back when it was still in CAD, there wasn't Revit yet, and all the calculation stuff that you were starting down the roads of. How far did you feel I didn't even ask you, I haven't ever asked, how far do you think you got with that? And like was that driven by what drove that idea that, hey, we're going to look at actually doing calculations with ITM?
Right. Most of the development, if not all of it, from probably 2005 onwards, was customer driven, or it was more customer driven than it was market driven.
Okay.
So that particular design aspect of CAD MEP, that came about from a consultancy called Ove Arab. I don't know if you've heard of Ove Arab. They may have some outlets in the US, but they needed some design software, and they were already using CAD MEP for doing the 3D models, but they wanted to do some design calculations with it. So they were put in based on that big customer's request. And yeah, it's actually very functional.
I was trying to do hydraulics with it, and I could do drainage piping, on a design line. I could do drainage piping just fine. So it would have just been time. I wonder if one of the objections to ITM right now from RFA is that when we replace ITMs, when we replace RFA with ITM, we lose engineering data, which usually isn't being used. So it's usually like we're losing nothing.
But we're not losing anything. That's
the on the off chance that someday the engineers start actually using Revit. I mean, would it be an impossible lift to add that back into the ITM?
No.
And I think that would silence them at least. I think so.
The underlying calculations and data required to do the sizing calcs are there on the items. They're just not hooked into the Revit UI for doing design. So that's the lift, but it's not a massive lift.
That's cool.
So you'd just be using basically more features of the classes that you've already written, right? I mean, it's all there.
Yeah, it's all there. You just need to hook it up.
If you were to talk to, hopefully we haven't lost any of our non-MEP listeners by now. But if you were to make a case for to a GC, to an engineer, anybody like that, to work with contractors that use ITMs, is there anything specific that you would call out that to the benefit of making sure that contractors would use ITM content?
Probably the amount of metadata that you can get with the item content without actually bloating the model up, without actually having to add on all these shared parameters. And especially when you take it to something like Stratus, where you can see all of the item properties. Okay, Revit's a bit restrictive at the moment because you can't see all of the properties that are on each of the items. You can through UI, through API, and through external products like Forge to a fashion, but certainly with Stratus, you can see all of that rich metadata that can be preloaded onto the items or populated. What else? Lightweightness of the model. The size of models that you can create using the item content compared to an RFA. That's certainly a benefit.
I think that's one we need to keep throwing back at Stacy.
I don't think people realize how bloated, even just text-based shared parameters become.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've seen some models now with like 500-600 shared text-based parameters,
Well, it's
And
our workaround,
that-
right? We always find a way to work around things. And the first answer
Yeah,
is
it is.
we'll all
It
make a
is.
shared parameter, you know, and
Yeah.
and it is a solution to your problem. But when you have 97,000 parts in a model that now all have that shared parameter, because let's face it, when we put the shared parameters in, we don't always do a great job of limiting it to the model categories that need it, or do, you know, it's kind of one of those like,
Just
well,
throw
I
it
You
on
don't
everything.
set up a schema or
Yeah,
anything.
it's like,
I have no
I
plan.
don't know if it doesn't need it, so I'm just going to assign it to everything because I don't, maybe
Why
maybe
is there
someone
a parameter called Eric? I don't know.
Right.
That's right.
Well, but let's talk about add-ins and stuff too, right?
Right,
You know,
right.
so we buy, you know, there's all kinds of third-party add-ins to Revit. And how do those add-ins function in Revit? With shared parameters. So every one of those you install is now loading.
So
30
much so
to
now that
40.
some of the add-ins have a feature to remove additional parameters that they're added that don't use. I mean,
And then we wonder why our models are unusable. I mean, that's a big part of the problem.
I think the other thing about items versus RFAs in Revit is the connectivity. You know,
Oh yeah.
Revit RFAs, native RFAs, do not have any real understanding of connectivity, right? Oh yeah, it's a sticky system. So if you drag something, everything moves or stretches. But if you put a valve in, native Revit does not understand that valve needs couplings of some sort to connect it to the pipes, right? Items do. So that connectivity works. It's only with the likes of add-ons that you get those connectivity rules for RFAs. If that add-on is not present, so let's say you ship that RBT out to somebody and they start deleting things or moving things, the thing breaks. It won't do that with items. It won't break. Do you know what I mean by that? Yeah.
Oh yeah, because we've all broken them. like everybody's broken them. I would make an argument. No, that's cool. I was, when we were talking about the engineer, because I came from HF Lens. I mean, still I spent a decade there as doing engineering. The fact that we didn't know the actual shapes of fittings and the actual shapes of ductwork meant that we put spaces in that never worked. I can remember one of the biggest arguments I had when I went back to HF Lens and they're asking me what I'm doing now. And I'm telling them about the ITM infrastructure. I'm like, you guys don't know that you're using impossible fittings. You're using impossible stuff. And I said, we're going to find out. And then we're going to charge you because we have to change it, you know? So it really is a huge difference. It just, I wish more of them would bite the bullet and say, hey, we're going to, at least at ductwork level, let's draw a duct with it. You know what I mean? If they're not using the sizing, at least draw a duct with it.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
I keep cutting off because Darren keeps chatting.
Yeah. So there's two things I guess I wanted to bring up.
You may have to invite
Trent,
Darren on at some
Trent
point.
wanted to hop into, but you going back to the connector thing, and the three of us were in Boston. I'm not sure how much we're open to talk about what was said there, but one of the common concerns we have in the industry is the lack of standardized content, and I think that's been kind of a pain point across many things, all the way from suppliers to contractors. And there was an announcement there that somebody's going after content, and connectors is one of the main things you brought up when you started to ask them what other, maybe this is kind of, we joked earlier about calling your baby ugly. What are some of the other things that might make it difficult to start to build out an industry standard across of content?
Well, there's two types of content, isn't there? There's the parametric template based content, which is not a real problem. That's more your sheet metal. The guy types in the sizes or types in the sizes from the properties palettes, and it draws to that. The biggest concern around content is the stuff that you have no control over how it's manufactured. It's bought in content, like valves, equipment, and probably the majority of your piping and fittings. That's all bought in. There's not a lot you can do with that. The problem is making the software understand how to connect the same specification of content from different manufacturers together. If that, I mean, it can. That's going to be the big challenge. So I can see if they can do something about solving those connectivity rules where you don't need a connector for Nibco and a connector for company X, that's basically the same thing. If that can be solved, that'll make it a lot easier. I don't know how it's going to be solved yet, and even if we'll be involved in it, but yeah.
Oh,
I mean, some of
Thanks.
the stuff Marsh is doing with field orders, that kind of gets around that. Maybe that becomes the next Revit platform, the field orders.
Hey, gaming engines are likely. I mean, I really feel gaming engines are likely to be where a lot of this content goes. And that brings up an interesting point. When we were talking ITM versus RFA, I'm going to give ITM an extra point because with what the API is now doing, it's getting to the point where you're likely to see ITM content. Not likely, we're definitely doing it in field orders, and I'm going to bet there's going to be other apps where that content now moves out into other apps. Because Andy, you had Est, wasn't there a separate actual fabrication program where you could just draw with Fab? Wasn't there like a brief series where there was a Fab product?
It was all based around the same engine and the same content. So it's just a different skin on it, but it's the internal code is exactly the same.
Yeah, I mean Darren's like, kind of like review, and my programmers use a review to look at Fab content, but that idea of agnostic content is pretty nice. That's like something that I think we really are looking for, is something that's not tied to one product. You know, I think if I'm right, I think Tekla is being developed at the moment, right? To be a new platform in some ways. I don't know that for sure. That's why, and I don't have an NDA. That's why I can talk about it. Maybe why other people shut up immediately, but who knows? But you know, I see with that content not being so, being that dynamic that it could live on beyond that too. So I got a question based on a lot on the work that I've seen lately. So what's the screwiest thing that you have seen done with your ITM content? Because I just saw a piece of pipe 4 weeks ago or something where they had used the specification to change the end types between threaded and grooved based on the size of pipe. So they actually just baked it into a single pipe. I'm using a spec, which is, they're probably a ductwork guy. They're like, I'm a ductwork guy. I'm just going to use spec to drive my connectors and I'm done. What's the screwiest thing you've seen, or can you think of something that you thought was pretty clever or weird? Weird works too.
Let me think about that. I'll think about that and come back to you.
Travis, have you hacked it at all? I know I hack it all the time.
Yeah. I mean, I've done similar things like that. You know, the specification thing actually was kind of interesting to me. I didn't think about that because we do have, 16 different pipes that are essentially the same thing with just a different end connection.
I found a reason not to do that, by the way.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Talk to me later. Okay. There's a reason.
There's probably reasons not to do a lot of what I do. So,
but you don't know that until you do it, right?
Right.
So it's kind of fun.
Do you have one, Trent?
No, I was gonna because we were talking about the connectors, and I think it was important. We kind of glossed over, but Ken in the chat had talked about the connectors being one of the reasons that he is driving the ITM content at his company, and because it's a really good point. I've used the competitors out there. I've kind of drawn with both sides of the both sides of the fence with content and Revit, and there really is something to say about, and especially with the shortage of detailers in the world, and when you have to scale up with work, and talent level of people drawing some of your jobs isn't always going to be there.
How politically correct.
The RFA stuff will, it'll let you put a 16-inch carbon steel flange on a 2-inch piece of PVC, or there's it's
a lot more flexibility.
Yeah, and flexibility can be bad. I think a lot of people want flexibility, but in our world, flexibility can really be a bad thing when your job is driven by a very specific specification set.
I would say item content is flexible in a restrained way.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Or constrained way.
Yeah. It's like general population in prison, right?
You can constrain it by building product lists out of that data, and that constrains it to just the sizes that you want people to use.
Yep. And Ken, if you want to email me after the show, I'll tell you how to do what you're trying to do. Because I hacked around with a lot of that too when I got into Revit. One of the fun things that they had us build when we were at Spader was they were trying to use the estimating suite, but they didn't have enough content. So they went through the MCA labor book and they grabbed like a drinking fountain and they'd list all the drinking fountains as product listings under a block that said DR. And they drop that into the EST program. So you have just one item that contains all of the labor information for drinking fountains. You can just drop and set. And we were doing that for like all our fixtures too. There was a little fixture, you drop the fixture, set it for whatever it is in the MCA labor table and move on with your day. I think that's why it did so well. It was just so hackable. Like you could build whatever you wanted to out of it. I love that type of a platform.
But it didn't let dumb people make dumb decisions, though. Too,
no,
right?
Yeah.
I shouldn't say dumb. It didn't let ill-educated people make dumb decisions, right? Or the people who don't know what they don't know. So
it's got the bumpers like in bowling, right? Like you can do whatever you want between here, but those bumpers are going to keep you in line.
I got to tell you, though, in using the ITM content with what I'm building now, a lot of the complaints I get back are when somebody tries to put something together that doesn't work. And they're mad because it doesn't work. And I'm like, but it really doesn't work. You just tried to put, a socket weld fitting on a threaded pipe. You actually, theoretically you can do that, but you really shouldn't do that. And it is an odd, it's an odd duck there for sure. So when you when they started building the EST product, because we talked a lot about like the Revit and we talked about the CAD, and EST was one of the ones that I think had less adoption, but the people that adopted it got a lot of mileage out of it. What kind of a lift was it to move? Because I know you were estimating ductwork early on. When did you guys start to really say, okay, we need to build out an estimating platform with this product?
It's kind of evolved along with CamDuct. Excuse me. A lot of the sheet metal companies in the UK needed to bid for the job before they could win it. So it became it originally was part of CamDuct. And because the item knows all its properties, like its sheet metal area, its weight, its exact area, the amount of flanges it needs, the number of bolts and corners for flanging and all that type of stuff. The next step was to add pricing data to that. From pricing data to the raw quantities came the need to add lookup tables based on standards like SMACNA, or in the UK DW144. There's a set standards for how you cost something out. So we built tables, but kind of flexible tables. So the same tables can be used in the UK as they can in the US for setting up SMACNA standards. And then like I say, the code between CAD, CAM, and EST is the exact same code. It's just a different skin on it. So all those three products understand all of the costing data and estimating data and nesting data and all that type of information. It's just not exposed to those platforms' UIs, but it's all there. And because of the item class, the way that was built originally, it was very easily to extend and add new methods to it and add new properties to it to support all the costing information that was needed.
Yeah. Are you a little surprised that it didn't take off more? I know that I know that there are a fair amount of companies using S, but it still doesn't seem to be one of the primary estimating platforms out there.
Yeah, a little surprised. It's because of the setup that's needed, because of all that data that you need to preload it with to make it work. If they get it out of the box and they do an estimate and it's a mile off what they're expecting, they're just going to put it back in the box.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So unless it's preloaded with real world data,
Sure.
it's not going to
That's the problem. That's the problem I hear with estimating departments is if they in any way, shape, or form think that it's going to take estimating longer, they're already out.
Yeah,
Right.
Estimating is seen as a cost. It's seen as a burden, and it is about volume. So yeah, I think that's
absolutely
I think that's maybe why it didn't get the traction. I mean, I think it's a far superior way to estimate. I think we all understand that. But if my hit rate is 10%, there's a point of no return, or there's a point of diminished return, I guess, is kind of what they're looking at. So if the hit rate was much higher, then I think you would see contractors invest more time in their estimates.
It's such a huge competitive advantage, though. If you find the companies that are using EST, they're like, Ronson's on here and he's like, that's where it starts, man.
We say that all the time. The dorks, we talk about that all the time. It's like, when your hit rate's 11%, it's like you're bidding the wrong jobs, right? I mean, it's hard to convince that to the powers that be who just want volume. So
for sure. What the powers that be don't understand about the way SMEP works is that you might bid for 10 jobs, you might get 2 of them, but those 2 that you get, and if they were done with SMEP, you're 80% of your detailing already done.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. I've fought that fight, trust me. I know.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And it's backwards too. We can make assemblies and we can push those back into estimating, man. And it was driving me nuts. I had little parametric assemblies from CAD MEP, and I'm trying to push them back into EST for my estimating group. And like, it's so easy. Please, this would just save me time. But it's tough lift.
It is.
Well, I know we're at 6:55 here. I think a couple more questions. So I've got one I always, and this one's, and it's not meant to trip you up in any way, Andy, but I guess it's, we've sit here.
But shoot the rest of that Merlot real quick.
No, this is fine. We're clearly the 4 of us are ITM biased here. I think we've all kind of made the determination that it's our favorite method. So I've got to, there are competitive ways of doing this out there. So I guess I've got to say, in your head, what's one thing that RFAs can offer that you think ITM should do better at? Is there anything out there that's given that other side maybe a little bit edge? It's just, and it's not meant to trip you up or get you in trouble or anything, but you can always learn from the competition.
Sure. I mean, for the subcontractor, I'm struggling to think, but for the for the designer, yeah, definitely. RFAs, you've got all the design calculations, all the flow rates and things going through them. We don't have that. We don't have that in items. An RFA, an item, a native item. No, I'm saying native. I'm going to take that word out.
It's a bad word.
Yeah. An item of a valve. I can't superimpose the word Grundfos on that valve. I can on an RFA if I want to. That's a marketing benefit for the valve manufacturer. I don't know if it really benefits the Revit user, but the amount of content I've seen with the names of the manufacturer of the valve in the model is ridiculous, because how many faces and facets does that put on it? But,
25 meg valve there.
Right.
Yeah, there you go.
And pretty is not productive, right? We know that, but
right.
Yeah. I suppose there's a customer out there that might like it.
Yeah. Some of the, I think, I'm pretty sure now, well, I do know that items handle the shading or assigning solid fills to them in Revit environment, whereas RFAs can handle more than just the solid fill. They can do transparencies and all sorts of other hatch patterns, possibly. You know, what great benefit that is to the detailer, not sure.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. I think we assign materials to the RF or to the ITMs now to kind of
Yeah, I
colorize
think you're
things. But yeah,
I always used filters. My
And
ITMs
that's
the
were always
normal
filters.
way is
Yeah.
filter a service
Right.
filter with a color. Yeah.
I think
Oh,
you
yeah.
can you can use materials as well.
Believe it or not, I've been asked several times when I was doing refineries to give single line. So that was my biggest hang up
Alright,
on
yeah.
ITM.
Level of detail.
Yeah, in Revit is if I'm doing a refinery that's multi-platform, you know, it's so dense with piping you can't see anything anyways.
Right.
And in 3D you really can't. And I can remember it was almost a game killer to not have those lines. I ended up doing there is an answer. There's a PCF export from ITM and you can use that to make the single line, but it's a little bit of an arduous task.
Right. One of the
Wait,
other things
Darren's like, let's talk about double wall ovals.
I was actually gonna pose maybe the final question can come from Darren if we pull in. I don't know. He's I know
Darren,
we're
give us
nearing
a
the top
final
of the hour.
question. He's going to ask you something very horrible.
Something-
well,
yeah.
there is one thing that I will say
It's
about
awesome.
items that's not supported and never has been, and it's never been requested, is having liner and lagging on at the same time. People bring that up all the time about RFAs. I mean, so what? I've never been asked for that in 30 years. So there you go. Items can't do that. RFAs can.
He says, I don't have a good question.
Darren doesn't have a good question. We don't want a good question. We want a bad question, Darren.
I
That's what-
have an obscure question. It just dawned on me. What is on your wall behind you? Are you a big boxing fan?
Oh, that's Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson. I think I've seen every single one of his fights, and they were always on at like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning in the UK. Whenever he was fighting at Vegas, it was always a party night.
Right on.
Awesome. Yeah, I just
Right on.
something completely off topic. I just kept picking up on that. I thought it would be kind of good.
Yeah.
Including the fight on the plane.
Yeah, did you watch the fight on the plane?
Did you watch the fight on the plane recently? Do you think it's
That
funny
dude-
that the judge is like, "Nah, you're fine. It's cool."
Dude,
Don't worry."
that dude deserved it. I mean, I'm
He
sorry.
did.
You threw a bottle at the dude. I don't
Right.
feel sorry for
Exactly.
you. So
Exactly.
So
Well-
I guess one question I would have at this point, as you are, you know, if everybody doesn't fully know right now, I mean, you're still working on the ITM content and the map content, you know, for Autodesk and Autodesk products.
Mhm.
You're helping GTP out with their
Yep.
products.
Yep.
Where do you see things going from here?
Onwards and
great
upwards.
question.
Like you say, I'm consulting with GTP, and through that consultancy, I consult with Autodesk. So I'm actively doing work with Autodesk, fixing any pattern problems that have been reported over the last 7 or 8 years that have never been addressed. So there's lots of work being done there. Doing a lot of stuff with GTP and Jonathan Marsh around extracting all that rich data that we can get from the items and your databases, making it available into other platforms, i.e. field orders. Yeah, I just don't see a stop to it. You know, I wish there was, but I just can't see myself retiring.
There's no exit strategy.
There's no exit strategy.
When Andy retires, the entire industry has to figure out what to do next.
No, there's still some good guys left with Autodesk. So
Yeah.
I think, yeah, they can't not support item content.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's come a long way over the past few years. I mean, I guess to look from like 2018, 2019 to now, it's a night and day difference with using ITMs and Revit. So a lot's happened in a few years. It's exciting to see what's going to happen over the next few, I think.
Do you think we could solve this whole argument if we just changed the file extension on ITM? It was just a massive project to change the file extension on ITM to like RFA, and we just call it good, you know?
Just change it to like do like NR native Revit, and then it is native. Oh yeah, it's native. Yeah.
Well, one of the problems is the other platforms that support ITEM don't support RFA, and I can't see that happening. That's not on the roadmap, I don't think.
No,
right.
No.
So you're not going to be able to take an RFA into STMEP or CamDuct, and like an RFA for sheet metal doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It has no clue what its flat sheet developments are.
Exactly. And I'll say and this is a plus and minus for Autodesk, I guess, but ITMs are going to outlive Revit. So you need to decide what's more important, your quote unquote native Revit or something that's already made the switch from platform to platform. So,
right.
So we are over the time, but
that's fine.
Do you guys have any last questions? I know we got to close with what Darren said. So for anybody that doesn't know, in CAD MEP, you can wrap items that are blocks and turn them into ITM. So you can wrap a block, turn it into an ITM. He's like, hey man, Darren's like, let's make it so that you can wrap an RFA into an ITM.
You can actually do that. There was a plugin where you can do an export from Revit. It was
to CAD. To CAD MEP.
To CAD MEP. That gives you the geometry, and then you can wrap that and send it back to Revit.
Yeah, because that makes sense.
Doesn't it? If you were in the original CAD MEP, not CAD MEP, that was using ITM, couldn't you could export? Then there was a way to re-import it, and it just became ITMs because we were using it as a hack for a while.
It becomes a non-parametric item. Yes.
Yeah.
It's a wrappable, or I mean, you can even do. There is an option in CAM Est and CAD, I think. I don't know if it's still there, but you could do a SketchUp file. You could import a SketchUp graphic, take that into an item.
Yeah.
I mean, that's interoperability between Trimble now, isn't it, SketchUp?
I think Darren's solved our problems. We just need RFA wrapping to be a button in Revit, and then we're
please don't waste your time with that. Please don't waste
it sounds more and more like ITM is the original common data environment. I mean, everything can use it.
I remember
I don't disagree.
Back in 1997, something like that, when Autodesk were trying to ram MFC, Microsoft Foundation classes, and what was that common data format that was around? IFCs. Remember IFCs? Yeah, and 10 years later, they were still trying to push that. That fell flat on its ass. Yeah. Went nowhere.
Yeah.
All right, who wants to ask that last question?
I don't even. Darren, apparently you do have questions.
Yeah, Darren, you lied. You do have questions. So Darren, here's my question. What does OPUS stand for?
I think it was some sort of Greek goddess, wasn't it?
Andy's Googling it right now, Darren.
In CamDuct.
Oh, no, in CamDuct. In CamDuct, what's an OPUS stand for?
Well, Opus is the 2D CAD drawing program, but I don't actually know why it was called Opus.
Oh, okay, cool.
Some nerd remembered his Greek mythology or something like that, right?
Yeah, it's something like that.
Probably is.
Probably.
It's an acronym made up on the spot for a drinking game.
Right. Hey, why not?
So do you guys have any more questions?
No, I just want to say thanks. This has been super fun. I mean, I think all 8 people at this point that were probably listening to this, really nerding out about this, are really going to enjoy it.
Well, then we will call this one wrapped. This was episode 47 of the DorkCast.
Did we wrap it?
Are you content with your content?
Do we wrap it? Is it?
And can you wrap it out of Revit?
Thanks so much, Andy.
Yeah, thanks a lot,
Thank
Andy.
you so much, Andy.
Very welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah.
I was looking at Mike Rose giving away a Sprinter van. And I was like, ooh,
Oh, really?
I want a Sprinter van. But no, I don't want to give you any money so that I get one because, well, that's not going to work.
Yeah, it's like the lottery. Like people, why don't you buy lottery tickets? I'm like, because I understand math. I don't know what.
Yes.
Andy, right? Copy. All right.
It only takes one. It only takes one winning number.
Right.
That's math too.
Yeah, they always say the lottery is the tax on the dumb at math.
Yeah. Burger King had a really good one at that too, where it was $1 for 4 nuggets, and then it was $3 for their 6-piece. And I was like, wow, that's just stupid tax right
Nice.
there.
Brother
Hey,
will fight brother.
You never know what opportunities will come from either of the ideas. You just
Right.
never know. You don't
Right.
really know what the future is going to have. So,
It's anarchy.
and we may end up, one of us may succeed at one of them, and 10 years from now,
Cats
the other
and
one may work
dogs.
for the
Cats
other.
and dogs living together.
Living together.
I love that line.
I do too. If you want to say shit, say shit. So Travis will obviously put that in as usual.
Mhm. If you
So-
ever need
so-
if either one of you need a chief thought leader officer,
I'm in.
Well, I've got the thought follower covered.
Thought
I've got that
follower.
one.